We'll now turn our focus to site design, the design template that creates our site's overall look and feel. A site design serves as the frame for the content that changes from page to page. If you're just starting to create a brand new site in Tangora, creating a site layout is a natural aspect of that process. But maybe you want to make fundamental design changes to an existing site. What we'll see in these videos is that you could actually change a site design just like putting on a new set of clothes. So we'll be creating a new site layout and applying it to an existing site. We'll be going into considerable depth on the topic, so we'll break it up into two videos. In this video, we're going to introduce Visual Designer Site Designer and create a basic site layout. In video 2, we'll adjust and finish this layout, preview, publish, and apply it. But now, before we create our new site layout, let's start from the beginning and learn how you can determine which site layout is currently in use for a given site. We can see that we have a site here, and we're in the process of creating our site structure and adding text and image content to our site. If we take a look at how this looks in our front end via the right-click function View Page in Browser, we'll see that we have a site layout in use with this grass image here. If I return to my page overview and then right-click on a given page and choose Properties, and then take a look at the Site Layout selection, we can see that it is set to the default, which is indicated by the fact that there is Select shown in the control. If I were to click Edit, then I'd come into our site design, which in this case has been created in Visual Designer. I can see that the name of this layout is Frez. I could also make some changes here if that's what I wanted to do, and these changes would be applied to all pages which use this site layout. But what I actually want to do here is to create a whole new design. We'll do this under Design and Layout. Before we get started, I just want to point out that there's a point here called Layout Usage, and here we have an overview of which site layout serves as our default. So we could see that the site that we're building currently uses the site layout Frez. Not only do we have an overview here, we also have the power to change a site design as a default to a whole site, which we'll do when we're done. Okay, so now we've set the stage for creating our new site design. We've seen how we can determine which site layout is currently in use for any given page, and we've seen where we define a site's default site layout. So now we're ready to create a new layout and take a tour of Visual Designer Site Designer. We'll get started by choosing Site Layouts under the Design and Layouts section of Tangora. And here we can see an overview of all our site designs. Note here too that you could use Smart View to find a given site layout if that's what you needed to do. And we'll just hit Create up here at the top. And now we have to choose the design tool. You could still create a table design here if you prefer to do that. Otherwise, you'll give your site layout a name, and there's also the possibility of writing a description, which can be handy. Layout slot requires a little bit of explanation. In short, you could choose to refrain from using a layout slot if you want to lock your site layout. That is to say, if you want to prevent that it could be applied to a live page or a whole site. So it might be relevant for you, especially if you're working in a larger organization. But barring that you need to take such security measures, you might just as well choose a slot from the start. And we'll do that here. They're randomly generated, so it is actually inconsequential which you choose. Right, then I'll just hit OK, and my Visual Designer Site Designer will open up in a new window. Your browser may force it in the background, so you may just have to bring it up into the foreground. Here we have Tangora's Visual Designer Site Designer. Let me give you a quick tour. We have some buttons up here at the top related to saving, previewing, and publishing. I'll explain the distinction later. These options are repeated in the drop-down Tangora button, where we also have some options to save as and export our layout, as well as accessing our layout's properties. Then we have four main tabs appear in the so-called ribbon, where we have the various buttons that become available depending on which tab we have chosen. Insert allows us to insert elements into our design. They could be structural elements called columns that get a yellow color, or they could be non-structural elements which get a green color. Note here too that when I select a given element, that I get new context-sensitive tabs that relate specifically to that element. I'll return to these later, but let me get back to the four main tabs. We can see that there's a gray background color and that there's a white block in the middle. These two areas correspond to the next two tabs, Page and Layout. So Page is essentially the background and Layout essentially the foreground or the contents of your site, if you will. An essential feature of your layout is the width. There is a default set here to 780 pixels, which in this case we'll actually just retain, but note here too that you could change up the width as it suits your needs. The View tab has some settings here for customizing your view, and we'll actually return to this later at varying points in our demonstration. Now, if I click on a column, we can see that we get a Columns Formatting tab, and here I have a range of possibilities that resemble the options that I have for my whole layout. When I click on a non-structural element, I get two extra tabs. Formatting is the same set of tools as for a column, and the next tab will vary depending on what kind of element is placed. If it's an image, for example, then you get a range of options relating specifically to images. So now we've created a site design and taken a tour of the interface. Next, we're going to learn about inserting, moving, and deleting elements before starting the construction of our site design in earnest. We've already quickly inserted some elements to our site layout via the Insert buttons found under the Insert tab. Now, if you want to move elements around in your solution, you just select an element that you want to move and then use the arrow keys on your keyboard to move the element. For example, let's say that I want to move an image into a given column set. But let me return to insertion. If I don't have a column selected and then insert an image, then the element appears at the bottom of my layout and I can move it if I need it. But if I wanted to add an element directly into a given column, I could just select that column and then insert whatever I wanted. Note here too that I could also move elements around inside a given column set using the arrow keys on my keyboard, and that a given column can contain as many elements as I'd like. And I could also move elements outside a column structure. I could delete elements by selecting them and then hitting delete on my keyboard. That would be Control-click for you Mac users out there. I could also delete a column set and all of its contents, in addition to deleting selected elements one at a time. Now we have the basics in place, so let's start the actual construction. We'll add a header, footer, and a couple of columns. We'll also set up our site's navigation and position a placeholder for where our page content will go. Alright, let's take a quick look here at the finished layout that we're going to recreate in this video. As we can see here, we want to have a header image up at the top with a logo, so let's execute that task. If I had an image with this combination, that's to say, if I had a logo that was already included in my header image, I could just insert that image here. But what I'm going to show you now is a handy technique when that's not the case. To achieve this layering of images, I'm going to add a so-called background image to a column. First, I'll add a single column, and then in the Context-Sensitive Column Settings tab, I'll choose Background Image, and then find the appropriate image using Smart View. The background image repeats as a default behavior, but I could either turn that off using the built-in interface, or I could just ensure that my column height was shorter than the height of my image. Next, I'll add a logo image inside the column by going into Insert Image and choosing the appropriate image. The image appears in the upper left-hand corner, but I would like to place it to the right with some space around the logo. This I could do in 3 steps. First, I select the image. Then, under the Merge Field Formatting options that appear, I choose Wrap, Float Right. Finally, I can adjust the air around my logo by setting a margin or padding, which corresponds to the space around my logo element versus space inside the logo element. They have the same effect. Here I'll use margin, and I'll add a normal margin. But let's say that I wanted a little more finesse over exactly where I'll place my logo. Under Margin, we have an option for a user-defined margin, and here I can adjust the exact pixels for any edge, or ems, or points if I wanted to, by the way. And using the Apply button, I can see what the results will be before I commit by hitting OK. There's also a tab with settings specific to image elements. Here I could choose a hover image, if relevant, and I could also choose a link. Here I'll choose that you return home when you hit the link. And I could also adjust my so-called alt text, which is controlled centrally, but which I can overrule here. An alt text can be used for search engine optimization, where you include important keywords in the title. I could also replace the image with another, maintaining the other attributes. I could change the size of an image as it appears in the current context, so the source size will not be affected. And finally, I could edit the image, which brings me to Tangora's image editor. If the image is used in other contexts of Tangora, or if it belongs to a category where some adjustments already have been made, I might be prompted to save a copy. Let's place the rest of the elements now. and then we'll return to each one to adjust the design at a later point. I could add a navigation simply by inserting a new navigation under the Insert tab. We could see that a navigation placeholder is inserted. Note here too that the navigation reads navigation 1.1, 1.2, etc. And yeah, that's just some dummy text. Next, I want a column with my sub-navigation in 2 levels, and then I'd like the page content to be shown in another column. So I'll add a column set here, and then I'll just drag to get the look more or less how I want. I can instantly adjust the minimum height of a column set, and the width of each column under columns formatting if pixel precision was required. So inside my left-hand column, I'll add a navigation, which gets the number 2. If I want to have my third level pages to appear under the respective second level menu points, I could take a hold of my navigation and insert another navigation, representing the third level, and now it will work automatically. The placeholder for my page content, where the page layouts take over the design, is up here, and it is called Content. When we place it, we'll see a bunch of gibberish dummy text here again. Next, let's place our footer. This is just a text box element. I have some text which I've copied to my clipboard, and I'll just paste that in here, and we'll return to it in just a bit. Now that we have some placeholders in place, I'm going to change the background color of my layout to white, and this I'll do under the Pages tab. So far, so good. We've now come as far as creating a layout and positioning some design elements. But watch on as we'll finish our work in the next video. Here, we'll come full circle. We'll refine, preview, publish, and apply our site layout.